On my sister's wedding day, I drove 6 hours and found my own face taped to the gate with a red line slashed across it and four words that erased me instantly. Do not let her in. I did not argue. I did not ask for her. I did not cry. I simply put my truck in reverse and felt something inside me go quiet in a way that told me nothing about this day would ever be the same again. People always imagine humiliation as something loud. They picture shouting or a scene or someone collapsing under the weight of it. But sometimes it comes as a soft blow, so clean and sharp that the world does not even notice a thing has happened, while your life shifts to a different angle. That was what I felt as the guard held up that laminated photo, the same picture taken of me at a harvest dinner years ago, a younger version of myself smiling without effort. He looked almost apologetic, but apologies did not soften the thick black letters beneath my photo. He said the instruction came from the bride, my sister, Vivian. I nodded at him, steady and calm. Then I backed away from the gate of Willow Creek Estates, the most expensive wedding venue in our region, a place where the grass looked trimmed with scissors and the fountains glowed, like they belonged in a magazine spread. I left like someone who had mistakenly taken the wrong turn, not someone who had just been cut out of her own blood's life with a single, printed sheet of laminated paper. I turned down the long, curved road and watched the black iron gate shrink in, my rearview mirror until it was nothing but a dark line against the white sky. My story did not start at that gate, though I suppose that is where the truth revealed itself. It started much earlier that morning before the sun was fully awake, inside the farmhouse where I grew up. The house was quiet when I walked through it. It had been quiet for years. Dad's hat still hung on the peg inside the back door, the brim curved from the way he always settled it against his forehead. Mom's favorite sweater was folded neatly on the shelf above the washing machine. Neither had been touched in a long time, but I liked seeing them right where they belonged. It made the house feel less empty. I stood for a moment in the kitchen before leaving, my hand resting on the back of Dad's old wooden chair. The seat had a worn dip in the middle from decades of long days and late dinners. I remembered him sitting there with the dust of the fields still on his sleeves, Mom moving around the stove, humming the same tune she always hummed on cold mornings. They had both been gone for over 5 years now. Sometimes it feels like they disappeared overnight. Other times it feels like they only stepped outside to check the weather and somehow never came back. I locked the door behind me and walked across the yard, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes. The air was cool and smelled faintly of alfalfa. The early light had that pale, forgiving quality of mid-autumn mornings, the kind that softens edges but sharpens memories. I slid into my truck and set my hands on the steering wheel, letting the familiar texture ground me. I wished just once that Dad or Mom were still around to ask if I was sure I wanted to go, to tell me it was all right if I did not. But I had no one left to ask except myself, and I had promised myself long ago that no matter the distance between me and Vivian, I would show up for her wedding. If you are listening to this right now, I wonder where you are. Maybe you are making dinner or driving home from work or folding laundry with the television playing softly in the background. For me, in this moment of the story, I was sitting behind that wheel before sunrise, telling myself that no matter how strained things had become, I could still do the right thing. The trip from Brooks Cooperative to Willow Creek Estates is a long one, a stretch of rural roads and quiet highways that cut through farmland and past towns so small they barely take up a minute of driving. I watched the scenery shift from rolling fields to clusters of businesses and eventually to sharply groomed subdivisions. The closer I got to the venue, the more out of place my old truck felt among the polished cars gliding beside me. I saw people dressed in tailored suits, stepping out of shining vehicles, walking with that kind of practiced confidence that comes from belonging to a higher rung. I reminded myself that I had chosen a simple dress, neat and pressed, not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I wanted to honor the moment as best I could. Even if Vivian never quite valued the same things, when the venue finally appeared, it almost startled me. Willow Creek Estates looked unreal, like someone had carved a wedding scene out of a luxury catalog and set it directly onto the hillside. The iron gates gleamed. The stone walls flanking the entrance were covered in ivy so perfectly arranged that not a single leaf dared stick out. 2 attendants stood near a valet circle, checking clipboards with a kind of strict efficiency. As I slowed, one of them glanced up. His face shifted almost imperceptibly, and he motioned to someone behind him. A security guard stepped forward, moving with the certainty of someone who already knew the outcome. He asked for my name. When I gave it, he nodded once as if everything had just clicked into place. Then he reached under his arm and slid out a laminated sheet. My photo. A thick red line slashed through it. Do not let her in. The words looked heavier than the sign itself. He did not say much, only that the directive came from the bride. He apologized in a soft tone, the voice of someone who did not enjoy the job he had been given but still had to carry it out. I thought strangely about how often my dad did jobs he did not enjoy but carried out anyway, because that was what life required. I thanked the guard. I meant it. None of this was his doing. Then I put the truck in reverse and eased away from the entrance. My throat felt tight, but no tears came. My hands felt steady, but something inside me pulled away from the moment, as if a curtain had fallen between who I had been on the drive here and who I was now. I drove until the venue disappeared from view. Then I kept going until the road straightened out and the world grew wide. Again. I pulled to the shoulder a few miles later and shut off the engine. The silence inside the truck felt immense, like the quiet that comes after a heavy storm passes through and leaves the air unsettled. I rested my forehead on the steering wheel and took a long, slow breath. Humiliation has a temperature. Cold, clean, sharp. It settles inside you with precision, the way ice forms along the edges of a window pane. That is how it felt. Not rage, not heartbreak, just clarity. Vivian had not forgotten me. She had not made a mistake. She had planned for me not to be there. I sat for maybe 10 minutes, maybe longer. The clock on the dashboard blinked without urgency, unaware that anything in the world had changed. Eventually, I straightened up and turned the key again. The engine hummed to life, and I let the familiar sound nudge me forward. I drove toward the nearest town. A quiet place with a faded diner sign and a small coffee shop tucked between a hardware store and an old pharmacy. I parked, walked inside, and ordered a coffee the way someone orders a prop to hold while they think. The cafe was warm and smelled like cinnamon and aged wood. A few people worked on laptops. A couple spoke softly near the window. No one looked at me. No one knew that 6 hours of hope had ended with a single sheet of laminated paper. I took a seat near the back and stared at the steam rising from my cup. I thought of Dad's hands, rough and steady, resting on the table after a long day. I thought of Mom humming as she kneaded dough at the counter. I thought of how both of them would have told me I did nothing wrong. I wished I could hear their voices again just once. Instead, I sat alone and listened to my own breathing until it no longer trembled. Eventually, I left a few dollar bills on the table and walked back outside. The day had warmed. The sky had brightened. Nothing in the world reflected what had happened at that gate, except the way my heart felt quieter, firmer, as though a boundary had risen inside me without needing to be spoken. I did not know then that 4 hours later, inside that beautiful estate, Vivian's perfect wedding would begin to fall apart piece by piece. I did not know that the silence I chose at that gate would echo louder than any words I could have shouted. I only knew that something had shifted, and the shift was already moving toward them. But the truth is, the road to that gate did not begin with a drive at all. It began days earlier, in the quiet corners of my phone where a different kind of warning had already been waiting. 3 days before the wedding, Vivian sent me what she called her wedding guidelines. She used that exact word, guidelines, as if I were applying for a position at her event, rather than attending as her only sister. The message came in a long block of text, the kind that makes your stomach go tense before you even finish reading it. She started with the dress code. She said the ceremony was elegant, so she hoped I would wear something sleek and modern. Nothing too bright, nothing too patterned. Please avoid anything that looks homemade. I read that line twice. I had not worn homemade dresses since I was a child, but I understood what she meant. Nothing that suggested the farm. Nothing that suggested where we came from. The next guideline was about conversation. Vivian asked if I could keep things light. No talk about crops or weather or the co-op. No mention of the equipment grant I had secured for a group of small growers last month. Nothing that might lead anyone to assume I worked with dirt under my nails. She wrote that line carefully, but it was clear. Please do not remind anyone that our family farmed for generations. Then she wrote that she wanted the wedding photos to have a particular aesthetic. She asked that I avoid being in too many group pictures, especially those taken near the front. She said it was about balance, about spacing, about how the photos would look when arranged in her new home. But the wording pricked something inside me. She said, "Maybe it is best if you stand near the back so everything looks aligned." She ended the message by telling me she was excited to see me. I stared at the phone for a long time after that. I tried to read her words with nerves. As wedding stress. As a sister overwhelmed with wanting everything to be perfect. But even when I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, the truth hovered beneath the surface. She was afraid of being connected to me in any way that might show the roots she had spent years trying to crop out of her life. I put the phone down and walked outside to the porch. The night air felt cool against my skin. The fields were dark and wide, holding the same steady strength they always had. I wondered if Vivian had forgotten what it felt like to stand on this porch in summer, listening to the irrigation lines hiss across the fields while Dad tinkered with a stubborn tractor light. I wondered if she had forgotten how Mom's laughter carried on the breeze. Maybe forgetting had made everything easier for her. Later that night, I received a second message from her. Shorter, sharper. "Just don't make me look bad." That was the whole text. No greeting. No explanation. No thank you for driving 6 hours. No, I'm glad you're coming. Just that one instruction wrapped in fear disguised as control. I felt something twist in my chest as I read it. Not anger, not sadness, something quieter. A kind of settling inside me. The kind that happens when you finally stop pretending you do not know what someone really thinks. The day before the wedding, I tried to shake off that feeling. I pressed the dress I had chosen and set out the small gift I planned to give her. A locket engraved with the coordinates of the farmhouse. I wanted her to have something real, something rooted, something she could carry even if she never spoke of it. It felt like a gesture of hope, even though hope had been thinning between us for years. As I packed my bag, my mind wandered back to the brief conversation Vivian and I had about Caleb Holloway. She had mentioned him often over the last year, but always with a tone that sounded like she was holding her breath. Caleb was handsome and polished, the kind of man who moved through the world like it bent slightly around him. But that was not what struck me. What caught my ear was his last name, Holloway, a name I had heard before, though I could not place where. Vivian said his family was well connected, old money but quiet. They preferred privacy to status, which made it all the more strange that Vivian seemed obsessed with impressing them. She said Caleb's mother, Margaret, carried herself with the kind of grace you cannot buy. His sister Lydia was poised and elegant. They were the type of family, Vivian said, who notice everything but speak very little about what they see. I remember asking once, almost casually, what business the Holloways were in. Vivian shrugged, distracted. "Something with agriculture, I think, but not the kind you talk about. High level, corporate, clean." Those were her words. Not the kind you talk about. I felt a faint tug in my memory, something familiar, like hearing part of a melody you cannot quite name. But the moment passed before I could catch it. The night before the wedding, she called me briefly. Her voice sounded tight, as if she was holding every breath just long enough to keep the world from falling apart. She said the rehearsal dinner went well, but that she wanted everything that could. Next day to be perfect. Perfect. It was always that word. Before she hung up, she repeated the same instruction she had typed. "Just don't make me look bad." I whispered that I would do my best. I meant it in the only way I could. I would show up. I would be quiet. I would stay out of the way if that was what she needed. I thought maybe, just maybe, my presence alone could soften the distance that had grown between us. That thin thread of hope was what made me choose the dress pack, the locket, fill my travel mug with coffee, and step into my truck the next morning before sunrise. That thread carried me across county lines and long rural stretches until Willow Creek Estates finally appeared on the horizon. It was that same thread that snapped the moment the guard held up my photo, with a red line slashed through it. But in the days before that moment, I had not yet understood how easily something delicate can break. I had not yet understood that I was not meant to attend my sister's wedding at all. I had not yet understood how long she had been preparing to keep me out. And yet, even knowing what I know now, I remember that I woke up that morning believing sisterhood was still something worth driving toward. even if I was the only one driving in that direction at all. I went to that wedding because some part of me still believed in us, and that belief was the only thing I carried with me as I walked out of that cafe, got back into my truck, and tried to decide where to go next. I sat there in the truck for another moment, staring at the road stretching out in front of me like it was waiting for me to choose a direction. Eventually, I started the engine and pulled away from the shoulder, driving without much thought until the town I knew was closest came into view. It was a quiet place, the kind of town that existed mostly as a stopover for people with somewhere else to be. But at that moment, it was enough. I knew I needed a place to land even briefly before I could decide what came next. I parked outside a cafe with a faded green awning and a hand-painted sign above the door. The chalkboard near the entrance advertised a lunch special that looked like it had not been updated in weeks. Inside, the place smelled like cinnamon and black coffee, and the kind of wood that holds on to memories whether you ask it to or not. A bell chimed softly as I stepped in, but no one really looked up. People were scattered at tables, some reading newspapers, some staring out the window like they were waiting for their day to start. I ordered a coffee even though I knew I would barely drink it. The woman behind the counter smiled as she handed it over, the kind of smile given to someone passing through. I carried the cup to a table near the back and sat down, wrapping my hands around the warmth that pressed against my palms. My mind kept circling back to the gate, to the laminated photo, to the guard who looked at me with pity he could not voice. After a few minutes, I pulled my phone out of my bag and stared at it. There was only one person I needed to call. Not for comfort, not to vent, but because something deeper than pride demanded clarity. I scrolled until I found the contact. Nora Whitfield. Nora had been our family's attorney for years, handling everything from land leases to estate matters after Dad and Mom passed. She knew the farm, she knew me, and she knew enough about human nature to never be surprised by people's choices. I pressed the call. She answered quickly, her voice steady, familiar. She asked if I was all right. I said yes, even though the word did not feel entirely true. I took a breath and told her what had happened at the gate. I said it plainly, almost clinically, because adding emotion to it felt like giving something away. There was a long pause on her end. Then she said quietly, "I am so sorry, Camelia." I nodded even though she could not see it. I told her I was not looking for sympathy. I just needed to understand what this meant. Because months earlier, Vivian had come to me with a request that felt innocent enough at the time. She said there were parts of her wedding she could not cover. She said the Holloways had their limits. She said she needed help but did not want anyone to know. She asked if I would funnel a portion of the funding through an anonymous escrow so it would not appear tied to her family. And because she was my sister, and because Dad and Mom raised us to show up for family even when things were complicated, I agreed. Back then, I thought she just wanted to avoid public discussion about finances. It never crossed my mind that she wanted to hide who had helped her. I told Nora all of this again just to make sure my memory was right. She confirmed it was. I had been listed as the silent sponsor on a portion of the venue contract and several premium services. It was not about credit or recognition. It was simply a mechanism to get the invoices covered. The part I had forgotten until she reminded me was the conduct clause. Nora explained it in simple terms, the way she always did when she wanted to be certain I understood. She said when a sponsor contributes anonymously, especially to a large private event, the escrow has protections built in. If the sponsor is excluded, embarrassed, or refused legitimate access to the event, the contract is automatically flagged. Payments entering review cannot move forward until the matter is evaluated by the administrative board that oversees the venue. I sat there holding my coffee as she spoke, the steam rising between my fingers. So I said because she told them not to let me in. The system reacts on its own. Yes, and I do not have to file anything. No. The clause activates whether you want it to or not. I looked out the cafe window, watching a man unlock his bicycle across the street. He adjusted his jacket against the breeze before riding off. Unaware of the strange twist unfolding in a life he would never know existed, Nora asked if I wanted to take additional action. She said she could review the documents and request a hold. She said this was a clear violation. She said the venue had responsibilities. I told her no. I told her I did not want anything to escalate. I told her I did not want to punish anyone or ruin anything. I said the words slowly, deliberately, because I meant them. She paused. Camellia, the system will still run its review. I know, and you are comfortable with that. Comfortable is not the word, but I will not interfere. Another pause. All right. I will make sure you receive any notices that come through. Thank you, Nora. When I ended the call, I set my phone down and sat back in my chair. The coffee had cooled. I had not taken a single sip. I held it anyway, letting the cup warm my hands, even as something inside me felt colder than it ever had. I was not angry. I was not vindictive. I was not even surprised. What I felt was absence, a hollowing out. The kind of emptiness that takes shape when you realize a person has chosen, deliberately and without hesitation, to cut you out of their life in the one moment you tried your hardest to show up for them. I watched the cafe door open and close as people came and went, each of them stepping into their day with a purpose. I felt like I was suspended in time, hovering between the life I had come from and the one I had stepped into. Moment that laminated sheet was lifted in front of me. Eventually, I stood, left the coffee untouched, and walked outside. The air felt sharper now, as if the sun itself had turned its face away. I walked to my truck, unlocked the door, and slid in. I sat there for a moment with my hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing in the faint scent of old leather and dust that had worked its way into the seats over the years. Driving away felt both like leaving something behind and letting something go. As the tires rolled over the gravel and the town disappeared behind me, I felt a stillness take root inside me. Not peace, not forgiveness. Something colder, something clean. A kind of quiet that comes when there is nothing left to fight for and no one left to convince. I did not know what was happening at Willow Creek Estates at that exact moment, but whatever it was unfolding without me. And for the first time in a long time, that thought did not hurt. It simply was. The road stretched out ahead of me in a long, quiet line. But somewhere back at Willow Creek Estates, the quiet was starting to buckle. I would not know any of this until much later, long after the damage had settled into place. But while I was driving through open fields and leaving the weight of the morning behind me inch by inch, the first cracks in Vivian's perfect world were beginning to show. Inside the estate, the caterers were the first to feel it. They had been preparing the final round of hors d'oeuvres, arranging trays of stuffed figs and rosemary skewers, when the head chef's tablet chimed with a notification. It showed a red flag next to the payment channel tied to several premium services. He frowned and tapped the screen again. Under review. He reset the tablet, tried again, and got the same message. He called the coordinator. She shrugged it off at first, assuming it was a system glitch. Events that size always had too many moving parts for everything to run without a hiccup. But then the florist arrived with the last delivery. Towering centerpieces that were supposed to line the aisle. Thick roses, white orchids, and 3 varieties of lilies Vivian had specifically requested because she wanted the fragrance to float through the ceremony like something out of a perfume ad. The florist hesitated at the loading bay, keeping the arrangements inside the truck. She spoke to one of the planners in a low voice. There was a hold on the final invoice. She was not allowed to unload until the authorization cleared. The planner forced a smile and promised it would be resolved quickly. But her eyes flickered. Minutes later, the lighting technician stopped setting up the uplights along the stone archway. The special effects that were supposed to transform the courtyard at sunset into a soft golden haze were tied to the same authorization channel. He stood with his arms crossed, waiting for approval that was not coming through. By the time Grant Miller, the venue manager, stepped into the bridal suite hallway, the murmurs had already begun. Grant was a tall man with careful posture and the kind of expression that never betrayed urgency unless something was truly wrong. His presence alone was enough to make the wedding planner straighten her shoulders like someone bracing for impact. He asked to speak with her privately, but Vivian stepped out of the room just in time to catch enough of the conversation. "What do you mean?" Frozen Grant kept his tone polite but firm. "The sponsor account connected to several premium contracts has triggered a review. Until it is resolved, we cannot proceed with certain services." Vivian blinked once. Sponsor account. She repeated the words like she had never heard them. She glanced toward Caleb, who was adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror. He lifted his head at the tone of her voice. "What a sponsor." We paid for this. The planner cleared her throat and gave a careful look to Grant, silently urging him to be gentle. He explained that part of the wedding had been funded through an anonymous escrow sponsor and that the contract contained a conduct clause. Until the clause issue was reviewed, the funds could not be released. He did not mention the clause's trigger, only that the system flagged a problem. Vivian's eyes widened, not with fear but with something sharper. She took a small step back as if someone had opened a door behind her and let in a draft. Caleb moved closer. He asked if everything was all right. She nodded too quickly. Of course, everything is fine. But her voice cracked at the word fine. Across the courtyard, guests had begun to gather near the bar. At first, everyone acted as though nothing was wrong. But whispers travel easily in rooms full of people who enjoy hearing their own. Impressions echoed back to them. Someone noticed that the floral arch was missing. Someone else noticed the lights had not been installed. A few guests commented that the hors d'oeuvres had stopped circulating. Small concerns, but small concerns add up. In the Holloway family row, Lydia was the first to sense something off. She had always been observant, the type who paid attention to things most people missed. She leaned slightly toward her mother and whispered something small. Margaret did not look surprised. She had been watching Vivian since she walked into the courtyard, and she had not missed the way Vivian's shoulders had stiffened or the way her smile had sharpened along the edges. Margaret Holloway stood with a quiet grace, holding a glass of sparkling water with the same steady elegance she applied to everything. She watched as Vivian whispered fiercely with the planner, her hands moving in tight, frustrated gestures. She watched Caleb shift uncomfortably beside his bride, torn between staying calm and stepping in. She watched the planner force a reassuring smile that looked more brittle each time someone asked for an update. When Vivian stepped away from the conversation, she almost collided with one of Caleb's uncles. He made a polite remark about the ceremony being delayed. Vivian flashed a smile so bright it looked painful. Just minor adjustments. Nothing to worry about. But people were starting to worry. Or worse, starting to speculate. Grant approached Caleb next, explaining the logistical situation in a private tone. Caleb listened with a deepening frown. He turned to Vivian, his voice low but strained. "Why is part of our wedding tied to a sponsor?" Vivian's throat tightened. She said she would explain later. She said it was complicated. She said not here. But later was unraveling right in front of her. Meanwhile, the planners huddled together near the reception hall entrance, whispering with tablets in hand. The florist remained by her truck, arms crossed, unwilling to risk non-payment. The lighting tech paced slowly along the stone walkway, waiting for an all. Clear that was nowhere in sight. The caterers slowed their service further, holding trays of untouched appetizers, like props in a play that had stalled, mid-scene. The mood dropped. Guests shifted in their seats. A few checked their watches, then checked them again. Someone commented that for an event of this caliber, they expected things to run more smoothly. Someone else joked a little too loudly that maybe the money had run dry. Vivian heard that one. Her jaw clenched. Caleb gently touched her elbow and asked if she needed a moment. She shook her head. She could not leave. Not now. Not when everything she had built for months was cracking around her like thin ice. She asked for her planner again. On the edge of panic now, though, trying desperately to hide it. "Fix this." Her voice was sharp, small breaking. "Fix it now." The planner looked over her shoulder toward Grant, who was reviewing another notification on his phone. His expression did not shift, but his sigh was enough to reveal that the issue was deepening. Vivian saw it too. In that moment, the panic rose in her like a tide she could not outrun. She could feel the eyes of her future in-laws, her fiancé, her guests, all drifting toward her with growing curiosity. She sensed the whispers, the speculation, the unraveling control. She could feel the perfect image she had painted beginning to smudge. She clutched the fabric of her dress, fingers pressing into the silk like she could anchor herself through force. Alone. Everything she had feared for weeks, maybe years, was happening right in front of her. And she had no idea yet that the shift had started earlier at the gate, when she had sent a message too cruel to imagine. She did not know that the system she relied on for perfection had responded to her own choices. All she knew was that something was slipping through her hands, and she could not stop it. The first cracks had formed, and everyone could see them. As I drove farther from Willow Creek Estates, the road winding back toward open fields, the weight of everything pressed more heavily against me. Vivian's panic, her unraveling control. The whispers that must have been gathering in corners of the courtyard. All of it lived somewhere behind me now, but the ache in my chest followed quietly. It did not surprise me. It did not even sting the way it once would have, because what happened at the gate that morning had not started there. It began long before weddings and sponsors and laminated photos. It began with the two of us growing up on the Brooks farm. Our childhood was simple in ways that do not exist much anymore. Dad woke before the sun and moved through the morning with the slow determination of someone who understood that every part of the earth answers to its own timing. Mom taught at the local elementary school and always smelled faintly of chalk and lavender lotion. Our house was small, warm in winter, drafty in early spring, but full in every way that mattered. I loved the farm from the beginning, the rhythm of chores, the weight of soil in my hands, the sound of wind cutting through rows of corn. I liked knowing that effort meant something, that when you worked a field, it responded in kind. It taught me patience before I even knew the word. Vivian, though, was different. Even as a kid, she had a gift for looking past what she had and imagining what might be, waiting somewhere else. She was bright and charming in a way that drew people toward her, but she never seemed comfortable inviting those people home. When her friends asked what our family did, she would hesitate just long enough for the truth to land awkwardly. Then she would say something vague, like we helped manage land or that Dad worked in agricultural consulting. The word farm rarely crossed her lips. Mom tried to bring her friends over. She would set out extra snacks or bake cookies shaped like little barns and tractors. But Vivian always found a reason to cancel the invitation or suggest they meet somewhere in town instead. I used to think she just wanted privacy. Later, I understood she wanted distance. When we reached high school, the gap grew wider. Vivian gravitated toward friends whose parents owned construction companies or medical practices or insurance agencies. People who wore pressed clothes and spoke easily about vacations or new cars. I stayed with the kids, who knew how to change a tire at 13 and spent most weekends helping neighbors bale hay. We did not fight. We simply drifted, the way siblings sometimes do when one of them is trying hard to become someone new. After our parents died, the distance turned into something else entirely. Grief hits people differently, and for me, it sank deep enough that I took comfort in staying near the land that raised us. I kept the co-op running with the help of neighbors who refused to let the Brooks farm fall apart. I worked long days and quiet evenings. It grounded me. Vivian, on the other hand, ran, not literally but emotionally. She transformed herself with a kind of fierce determination. She changed the way she spoke, softening the rural edge in her voice. She changed her clothing. She changed her hair. She surrounded herself with people who knew nothing about who she had been before. The first time I saw her apartment in the city, it startled me. Everything was white or gray polished and curated like a magazine layout. She had no pictures of our parents, no small reminders of home. Instead, she had framed prints of skylines and quotes about ambition. I remember looking around and feeling like I had wandered into a stranger's life. I never told her that. The moment that stays with me, the one that still settles heavily in my memory, happened about 2 years ago. She invited me to a networking event in the city. She said it would be a good opportunity to connect with people who might support the co-op. I was hesitant, but I went. I wore my best dress, the same one I would later press for her wedding, and boots polished until the scuffs barely showed. When I arrived, Vivian was surrounded by people dressed in sleek suits, holding drinks in delicate glasses that looked too thin to be practical. She waved me over with a bright smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "This is my sister," she said. "She works in agriculture." There was nothing wrong with the introduction itself, but it was the tone that cut. Light, dismissive. The kind of tone people use when they are apologizing for something before the listener even knows what the apology is for. One of her colleagues asked what exactly I did. Before I could answer, Vivian laughed. Not a joyful laugh, but a soft, embarrassed one. "Oh, you know farm things," she said. "Dirt and tractors and early mornings." She said it like a joke. I felt the room tilt for a moment. Someone chuckled politely. Another person glanced at my boots, the ones I had polished so carefully, and smiled in a way that told me the joke had landed exactly where she wanted it to. Vivian moved on quickly, guiding the conversation toward her newest project, something involving branding or strategy or whatever it was. She felt important. People wanted to hear. I stood there swallowing the heat rising in my throat, smiling so the moment would not grow larger than it already was. On the drive home that night, I did not play the radio. I let the silence fill the truck, the same silence that had started to bloom between us long before that evening. I realized then that Vivian was not just ashamed of the farm. She was ashamed of me. Years later, standing at the gate of her wedding, seeing my face slashed through with a red line, it hit me with a clarity I could not ignore. The humiliation was not new. It was simply louder. Final. The kind of message that leaves no room for misunderstanding. As I drove back from the cafe, letting the emptiness settle into something quieter, I thought of that networking event. I thought of the small laugh she had used to smooth away our history. I thought of her carefully choosing every detail of her new life, every piece of herself she wanted to keep, and every piece she wanted to throw away. By the time the farmhouse came into view again, with its familiar chipped paint and weathered porch steps, the truth had settled so firmly inside me that it no longer hurt the same way. Vivian had not changed suddenly. She had been leaving me behind for years, and now with everything unraveling back at Willow Creek Estates, she was finally seeing the cost of building a life in distance and denial. I parked the truck and sat quietly for a long moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. The house was still. The field stretched out like the open palm of someone offering comfort, without words. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to clarity. Not forgiveness, not anger. Just the simple truth that some things break long before they finally fall apart. And some sisters stop being sisters long before a wedding ever gives them the chance to prove it. Vivian had been leaving me behind for years, and somewhere inside Willow Creek Estates, while I was settling back into the quiet of home, she was proving that truth in ways she did not yet understand. The ceremony space had grown tense, the air heavy with whispered questions and the thin shimmer of anxiety that gathers when a crowd senses something is wrong but has not been told what. Vivian moved through the courtyard, like someone trying to keep a fragile structure from collapsing under her fingertips. She smiled too brightly. She laughed too sharply. She brushed invisible specks from her dress, as if tidying herself could tidy the chaos unraveling around her. That was when Margaret approached her. Margaret always carried herself with quiet authority, the kind that did not need volume to be heard. She stepped beside Vivian with a small, knowing smile and asked if she could speak with her privately. Vivian agreed instantly, almost gratefully. She needed someone calm to anchor her, even if she did not recognize yet that Margaret was not seeking comfort. She was seeking the truth. They stepped a few feet aside, near a cluster of trimmed hedges that framed the courtyard. Guests were close enough to see them, but not close enough to hear every word. Vivian Margaret began, her tone gentle. "You seem unsettled. Is everything all right?" Vivian swallowed. "Yes. Just a small technical issue. Nothing important. It will be handled." Margaret tilted her head slightly. "I see. May I ask a question?" Vivian nodded too quickly. "I have realized that despite all this time, we have not spoken much about your family. I would like to know more. What do your people do?" For a moment, Vivian froze. It was the smallest pause, but it was enough. She recovered quickly, offering a practiced smile, the same kind she used in rooms filled with strangers she wanted to impress. "My family owned a small business," she said. "Nothing significant. Just basic operations. They were hard-working but not influential." She let out a soft laugh. It was a modest living, very modest. Margaret listened, her face calm. "What kind of business?" Vivian waved a hand lightly. "Oh, it was just local stuff. Rural, not something most people talk about. Definitely not agriculture." She said the word agriculture in a tone so dismissive, so wary, that it floated between them like a faint insult. She added quickly, "I moved away young. I wanted something more polished for my future. A different life." She glanced toward the guests. "Something like this." Her voice held a kind of soft apology directed not at Margaret, but at the image she imagined she had to maintain. Lydia had been standing only a few feet away, speaking with an aunt. She turned the moment she heard the word agriculture. Her expression flickered with disbelief. She stepped closer, pretending to adjust the bow on a centerpiece so she could listen openly. Vivian continued, her voice low and hurried. My sister still works in that world. The farm, the co-op. It is fine for her, but it is not something that aligns with how I live now. You understand? She said it with so much confidence that she did not notice the shift in Margaret's eyes. Because Margaret did understand. Just not in the way Vivian hoped she would. Lydia stepped in first, her voice cutting gently through the space. Vivian, do you know where the Holloway family started? Vivian blinked. She looked from Lydia to Margaret, confused by the sudden seriousness in their expressions. Lydia's smile was polite but sharp at the edges. Our entire fortune, every generation of it, was built on agriculture, not as investors, as farmers. Long before Holloway Agri Group existed, we were tending fields, working soil, and hauling crates the same way any rural family would. We did not inherit wealth, we built it, from land. Vivian's face lost its practiced ease. Margaret looked at her, waiting for recognition that did not come. Vivian stammered. I did not mean. I was not trying to insult. I thought, but she did not finish. Because what she thought did not matter anymore. The truth stood in front of her, dressed in the very elegance she had chased so desperately. She had insulted the foundation of the family she was trying to marry into. She had dismissed the work that shaped them. She had belittled the very thing that gave them their strength. Margaret lifted her glass slightly. The motion small, graceful, heavy with meaning. My family has always valued honest labor, she said quietly. There is dignity in work, no matter how humble. There is dignity in where you come from. She paused. Your answers concern me, Vivian. Vivian's breath hitched. I was only trying to present myself well. I did not want to seem small. Margaret's expression softened, but not with sympathy. With clarity. Smallness has nothing to do with work, she said, but it has everything to do with how a person treats their own roots, and how they treat the people connected to them. Vivian blinked hard. Her eyes glossed not with tears, but with the dawning fear of someone recognizing she has walked directly into her own downfall. Margaret glanced toward the section of the courtyard where the premium services were failing one by one. The missing florals, the dimmed lights, the halted preparations. She looked back at Vivian. Tell me something, she said. Does your sister know you speak of your family this way? The question struck, with the precision of a blade. Vivian could not answer. Her mouth opened then closed. Her silence was louder than anything she could have said. Lydia watched her arms crossed lightly, disappointment settling into her posture. At that moment, a shift happened. Small, cold, final. Vivian had thought she was taking a test on elegance, on presentation, on worthiness. But the real test had already begun the moment she opened her mouth, and she had failed it without even knowing she was being graded. Margaret turned slightly, her face calm but decisive. Thank you for your honesty, she said, her tone gentle but unbearably heavy. It tells me everything I needed to know. Vivian reached out. Margaret, please, I did not mean. But Margaret stepped away, her movements smooth, controlled, the way someone moves when they do not intend to look back. Lydia followed her, leaving Vivian standing alone beside the trimmed hedges, the sounds of the unraveling wedding swirling softly around her. She did not know it yet, but something in Margaret's mind had already clicked into place. A choice, a verdict, a quiet end to everything Vivian thought she had secured. And from that moment on, nothing she did could undo it. Caleb reached the edge of the courtyard just as his mother stepped away from Vivian. He had seen enough of the expression on Margaret's face to know something irreversible had shifted. Vivian watched her almost helplessly, her hands trembling at her sides, as if she could hold the moment together with her fingertips, if she only tried. Hard enough, but Margaret did not slow. She walked toward the ceremony platform where rows of white chairs waited, untouched, facing an arch covered with the flowers that had only partially arrived. The arch looked unfinished now, one side lush, the other bare. It created an unintentional symbolism that no one could ignore. The guests quieted as she approached. Even those who were still confused sensed something momentous in the air. Margaret lifted one hand and the crowd stilled entirely. Her voice was calm when she spoke. Not loud, not sharp, just steady. Before we continue with this celebration, she said, I feel it is important to speak plainly about something that has become clear. Today. Vivian's entire body jolted as if struck by a sudden burst of cold. Caleb took a step toward his mother, but she gently raised her hand again, signaling him to stay where he was. "We are a family built on work," Margaret continued. "Real work, honest work. The kind of work that shapes character and teaches respect for where you come from." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the guests, across the uneven florals, across the visible ripple of discomfort taking shape. Shame has no place in that. Pretending has no place in that. Dismissing your own roots has no place in that. A tight murmur moved through the crowd. Vivian's breath caught audibly. She pressed a hand to her chest as if trying to hold her composure in place. Margaret went on. "You cannot build a marriage on a foundation that denies truth. You cannot build a partnership while rejecting the soil that raised you. And you cannot stand beside my son if shame is the language you speak about. Your own family." The words fell like soft stones. No malice, no anger, just truth delivered without apology. Vivian stumbled forward. "Margaret, please. Can we speak privately?" But Margaret shook her head. "The time for privacy has passed." Vivian turned frantically toward Caleb. "Caleb, say something." Caleb opened his mouth, but no words came. He had never seen his mother take control of a room like this. He had never seen his fiancée look so undone. And he had certainly never imagined those two realities colliding in front of 200 guests dressed in tailored suits and chiffon gowns. While Vivian's panic rose, Grant Miller approached the front of the courtyard, his clipboard tucked against his side. He cleared his throat. "Apologies, ladies and gentlemen. I have a required announcement." The guests shifted again, uneasy, bracing. Per contract terms, Grant said, "The sponsor account associated with this event has been flagged for conduct. Violation review. All premium services will remain frozen until the review is complete." The word sponsor sliced through the air. Heads turned. Questions formed silently. The Holloways exchanged glances. Some guests leaned toward each other in urgent whispers. Vivian's face was drained of color. She clutched the skirt of her gown. No, that is not possible. There must be a mistake." Grant kept his tone courteous but firm. "I am afraid there is no mistake. Until the review concludes, we are unable to proceed with the ceremony or reception." Vivian spun toward Caleb again. "Caleb, do something. Tell them to continue. This is your wedding too. The Holloways have influence here." But Caleb did not move. His jaw tightened, and for the first time doubt flickered across his features. Margaret watched her son watch the woman he was about to marry, and saw clearly the widening gap between honesty and embarrassment, between roots and reinvention, between what she valued and what Vivian had spent years building herself upon. She spoke again, softer this time. "This wedding cannot continue." The words echoed across the courtyard. Carried easily by the still afternoon air, Vivian let out a small, strangled sound. The sound of something breaking that she had believed was unbreakable. She looked wildly around, searching for someone to intervene, someone to save face, someone to hand her back the control she had been losing piece by piece. And then she said the one sentence that slipped out before she could stop it. "Where is Camellia?" She needs to explain. The name hung in the air like a confession. Several guests exchanged looks. A few whispered. Others tried to figure out why the bride's sister had not been seen all day. Caleb's brows drew together. "Camellia. She is not here." Vivian froze. It was the moment she realized the truth had caught up to her. She had designed an entire life meant to hide the farm, the roots, the sister she hoped to erase. But she did not understand until that moment that erasing someone does not always make you look larger. Sometimes it makes you look painfully small. Margaret's gaze narrowed just slightly. "Where is your sister?" "Vivian?" Vivian opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She tried to find an answer that would not expose her. Then she tried to find one that would undo the events unfolding around her. But there was no way back. She whispered, barely audible, "She left." Margaret nodded once, not in approval, in understanding. Guests shifted again, but this time the movement was heavier, more final. The mood had shifted from confusion to clarity. Grant lifted his clipboard. "Ladies and gentlemen, until we receive authorization to proceed, this event is paused indefinitely. Please remain seated while we coordinate next steps." Vivian shook her head violently. No, this cannot be happening. This is my wedding." She turned in a frantic circle as if expecting the courtyard to rearrange itself back into the perfect day she had curated. But reality stayed exactly as it was. Guests whispering, vendors stepping back. The Holloways watched in measured silence. Caleb stepped toward her. "Vivian, we need to talk." His voice was calm but carried the weight of disbelief. He looked at her not as a fiancé, but as a man realizing he did not know the woman standing beside him. Vivian looked around for the one person she was certain would still protect. Her. But I was not there. I was already miles away, driving down a quiet highway with nothing but the hum of my engine and a kind of cold clarity settling into my bones. Vivian finally came to stillness. Her shoulders dropped. Her bouquet slipped from her fingers and hit the ground with a soft, defeated thud. And that was how the wedding ended. Not with music, not with vows, not with celebration, with silence, with truth, with the collapse of the image she had spent years trying to hold together. The ceremony was officially stopped. The guests were told to leave. And the life Vivian had been constructing fell apart in front of the very people she most wanted to impress, all while I was nowhere near the gate she had barred me from. It turned out no one needed to force their way in. Sometimes walking away is what brings everything else down. I watched the last of the wedding footage unravel in my mind for a long time, before I heard the sound of gravel crunching under tires outside the cooperative. It was late afternoon the next day, quiet in the way only wide-open fields can be quiet. The barn doors were open to let the warm breeze move through, and I had been stacking feed sacks along the back wall just to keep my hands busy. The steady rhythm of work always steadied me when my thoughts refused to settle. The engine outside sputtered off. For a moment I told myself it was just a delivery truck or a neighbor stopping by for some quick thing. But the footsteps that followed were hesitant, unsteady, as if the person behind them did not know whether they should keep going or turn back. I knew that walk. Even after all these years, even after everything that had happened, I knew it. Vivian stepped into the barn doorway. She stood framed by sunlight, but she looked small somehow. Like the light was too bright for her and she was afraid to step the rest of the way inside. Her hair was pulled back carelessly, not in the elegant chignon she had rehearsed for the wedding. Her makeup was gone, her eyes red around the edges, and her hands clutched each other in front of her, as if she needed something to hold. For a long moment neither of us spoke. She glanced around the barn as though she had stepped into a place both familiar and foreign. Dust hung in soft streaks of light. Bales of hay were stacked high near the loft. Dad's old toolbox sat by the workbench, the metal scarred from years of use. Mom's handwriting still showed on the labeling tape stuck to a shelf of jars. Vivian swallowed hard. "I thought you might be here." I set down the sack I had been carrying and wiped my palms against my jeans. I felt my heartbeat settle into something steady. There were no raised voices waiting to burst out. No anger pushing its way to the surface, only the quiet and the truth. She stepped in slowly, her heels sinking slightly into the dirt floor. She looked at the rafters, then the workbench, then finally at me. "I do not know where else to go," she said softly. The admission floated between us. It was not dramatic, not sharp. It sounded like a truth she had tried to hold down for too long and finally lost her grip on. "You came all this way," I said. "What did you need to say?" Her breath hitched. "I did not think it would go like that," she whispered. "The wedding, the ceremony, everything. I never thought it would fall apart in front of everyone." I nodded once. "I believe you. You do." Believing she had not expected the collapse was not the same thing as excusing what she had done. And both of us knew that. Vivian took another step in, her fingers brushing the side of a stall door like she needed a physical anchor. I spent the whole night replaying everything she said. My choices, my words, the way I treated you, the way I treated myself even. She let out a shaky breath. I kept thinking about Mom and Dad, what they would have said if they had been there yesterday. I looked down at the packed dirt under my boots. Our parents being gone did not mean they had vanished. Sometimes it felt like they were more present now, stitched into everything we touched. Vivian's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I think they would have been ashamed of me." I looked up slowly. She met my eyes with a kind of rawness I had not seen from her since we were teenagers. There were no walls left, no masks, no polished veneer she fought so hard to maintain. Viv, I said quietly, this is not about shame. This is about truth. What happened yesterday did not begin yesterday. It began years ago. She squeezed her arms tightly across her chest, as if she was trying to hold herself together. I know. I have been running from this place, from who we were, for so long that I forgot what I even wanted. I got so afraid of looking small that I ended up looking smaller than ever. I let her speak. She needed to let the words out before they crushed her from the inside. I thought if I reinvented myself enough, she continued, I could belong somewhere else. I could be the kind of woman people respected, the kind who never had dirt under her nails and never had to explain why her family smelled like soil and diesel and hay. I felt something tighten in my chest, not anger but sadness. You thought being from here made you less. She nodded miserably. And I thought being related to you made me even smaller. She said it with no malice, only truth. The confession itself felt like it hurt her. I took a breath and leaned back against the workbench. This farm never made us less Vivian. It taught us who we were. Hard work, honesty, showing up even when it hurts. You turned those things into something to hide from. That is what hurt me. Her eyes filled. I know that now. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. When Margaret asked about our family, I panicked. I thought if I admitted where I came from, I would lose the wedding I built so carefully. And instead, I lost everything anyway. Silence settled again, low and heavy. Outside, the wind pushed against the barn's siding with a slow groan. Vivian moved closer, stopping a few feet from me. Camellia, she whispered. I am so sorry. I am sorry for the gate, for the picture, for the things I said, for the parts of you I tried to cut out of my life. I do not know how to fix any of it. You start by telling the truth, I said. To yourself first, then to others when you are ready. She nodded, her lip trembling. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small velvet pouch I had brought in earlier that morning. I set it gently on the bench between us. The soft thud seemed to echo louder than it should have. She stared at it. What is that, the gift I never got to give you? Her face tightened with confusion. She hesitated before reaching for the pouch, her fingers brushing the fabric lightly, almost reverently. She loosened the drawstring and tipped it into her palm. The engraved locket slid out, catching a thin line of sunlight. The coordinates of our farm were etched into the metal. The exact spot where Mom planted her first garden. The exact place Dad built the barn with his own hands. Vivian covered her mouth. Her shoulders curved in like the weight of the little necklace was too much. I wanted you to have something of home, I said quietly. Something real. Something that stays even when people do not. Her tears fell freely now. She held the locket like it might shatter if she breathed too hard. I do not deserve this, she whispered. Maybe not yet, I replied softly, but it is yours if you want it. She pressed the locket to her chest. I am so lost, Cam. I do not know who I am without all the things I pretended to be. You do not have to know yet, I said, but you cannot keep pretending. Not with them, not with me, and not with yourself. We stood there for a long moment, not as enemies, not as strangers, but not as the sisters we used to be either. Something in between, something unsteady but honest. Vivian looked around the barn again, slower this time, as if she was seeing it for what it truly was, instead of what she once feared. It meant. She stepped toward the workbench, set the locket down carefully, then wiped her eyes. I want to change, she said, but I am not sure how. Change does not start big, I said. It starts with the smallest truth you can hold without running from it. She nodded like she was memorizing the words. I think I should go now, she whispered. I have a lot to face. She turned toward the door. For a moment, she looked back at me, her expression fragile, almost childlike. She opened her mouth as if to ask for something more. Comfort. Forgiveness. A way back to how things used to be. But she must have seen the answer in my eyes, because she closed her mouth again and gave a small, heavy nod. She stepped into the sunlight. The brightness hit her face and she lifted her hand to block it. She paused just outside the doorway, taking in the fields, the house, the barns, the life she had rejected for so long. Then she walked to her car. Her steps were slow, uncertain, but they were hers. Not borrowed, not performed, not part of an image she crafted to survive in rooms that never truly wanted her. She opened the car door, sat down, and rested her forehead against the steering wheel. I could not hear her words, but I saw her shoulders shake once before she started the engine. The tires rolled over the gravel. Then she turned onto the dirt road that led out of the cooperative. For the first time in years, she left not running away, but running toward something she had no name for yet. And I stayed in the doorway of the barn, watching the dust rise behind her car, hoping that somewhere in that dust was the beginning of the woman she might finally become. I watched the dust settle long after Vivian's car disappeared down the road. The barn felt painfully quiet once she was gone again. Quiet in the way you only notice when a storm has just passed, and you are not sure yet how much damage was done. I stood there for several minutes, letting the silence press against me, letting my breath slow. Then I turned back to the tasks I had left waiting. Work has always been the one thing you can return to even when your heart is still trying to find its footing. The next morning came like any other. The sun lifted over the fields in slow gold bands, warming the roofs of the barns first before touching the ground. The drought had already begun shaping the season, pulling moisture from the soil faster than we wanted to admit. I walked the rows with a small notebook tucked into my back pocket, jotting down pressure readings from irrigation lines, marking which pumps needed adjustment, checking the cracked places where the earth had opened in thin lines. The cooperative had weathered years worse than this. Dad used to say that land has moods just like people, and that you have to listen to it the way you would listen to a friend who refuses to speak plainly. Watch how it dries. Watch how it gives. Pay attention to what it cannot hold. So I walked and watched and worked because the land needed it, because the people tied to this place needed it, and because sometimes the only thing that steadies a person is remembering that their hands can still do good even when their heart is bruised. For the next week, that became my rhythm. Mornings in the fields, afternoons in meetings, evenings handling calls from growers worried about their crop estimates. I drove out to meet a soybean farmer who had lost nearly half his yield to the heat. He walked me through his field with shoulders rounded under the weight of numbers he did not want to say out loud. I listened. I helped him rewrite projections. I talked to a lender on his behalf. When he shook my hand at the end, there was gratitude in his eyes that reached somewhere deeper inside me than I expected. It reminded me that roots are not something to be ashamed of. They are something that hold you up when everything else starts falling. Word about the wedding began to drift through town in odd fragments. People did not know the truth, of course, and I did not give them any. But stories have a way of traveling even when no one speaks them directly. A neighbor told me she had heard that the ceremony was halted and that the bride had fled the terrace in tears. Someone else mentioned that the Holloways had been seen leaving early, their expressions unreadable. I tried not to think about it. I tried not to imagine the moments inside that venue after I drove away. But sometimes, in the late evening when I sat at the kitchen table sorting invoices and projections, I felt a small, sharp ache in my chest when I remembered how confidently Vivian had believed she could shape herself into someone untouchable. The truth has a way of touching you anyway. Around the 10th day after the wedding, my phone rang while I was loading fencing tools into the back of my truck. The screen lit up with her name, Vivian. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. Her voice was thin, almost brittle. She asked how I was doing. I told her the cooperative was busy, and the drought was stretching everyone thin. She waited as if hoping I would ask how she was. When I did not, she exhaled shakily and began speaking on her own. Caleb asked for space, she said. Then her voice cracked. I think he is ending things. Or maybe he already has. I leaned against the side of the truck, the metal warm under my palm. I listened without interrupting as she spoke about meetings that had been canceled, messages that had gone unanswered. The way the Holloways had politely stepped back from her life as though they were removing a fragile ornament from a shelf they regretted placing it on. She spoke of friends who had admired her wedding plans, but now moved around, her carefully avoiding the topic entirely. She said people were kind to her face but distant underneath. I did not gloat. I did not say I told you so. I did not feel triumph. This was not a triumph. This was someone standing in the rubble of a version of herself she could no longer recognize. After a long pause, she said, I do not know what to do, Cam. I took a breath. I am sorry you are hurting, I said gently. That was true. Even when love becomes complicated, pain is still pain. She waited again. I could hear her holding something back. Then she finally said it. Could you talk to Margaret for me? Or Caleb, just to explain. Help them understand I'm not a bad person. That I just made some mistakes. The old instinct tugged at me. The one that had pulled me toward protecting her for years. But it did not pull hard this time. It did not sway me. Something inside me stayed steady and rooted. Viv, I said softly, I cannot speak to them for you. Her inhale was quick. What do you mean? You are the one who has to tell the truth, I said. Not me. You are the one they need to hear from. She was silent for several seconds. Then her voice grew tight. They will not listen to me. Then you learn to speak in a way that makes people want to listen, I said. Not by shaping yourself into something else, but by showing who you really are. She let out a small, frustrated sound. You make it sound so easy. It is not easy, I said. That is why you have to do it yourself. The quiet that followed was heavy, but it was not angry. It was the quiet of someone standing at the edge of a truth they did not want to face. When she finally spoke again, she asked if she could come by the cooperative later in the week. Not for answers, just to talk. I told her she could. Then we ended the call. The days that followed built themselves into a rhythm that felt strangely grounding. I spent mornings repairing a broken line in the irrigation system with two of the younger workers, our boots sinking into damp soil while the sun climbed above the horizon. In the afternoons, I reviewed numbers that made little sense until I saw them, layered against the bigger picture of what this year might become for our growers. In the evenings, I walked through the western field and listened to the wind move through the drying corn. Somewhere in those days, I realized something important. My life was not defined by the chaos of a wedding I never attended. It was not shaped by being rejected at a gate. It was not anchored to the pain of being the sister someone wanted to hide. My life was shaped by the land, the people connected to it, and the quiet endurance passed down to me by parents who never needed to say much to make their values clear. One morning, I sat on the edge of the loading dock with a thermos of coffee, watching a pickup truck drive across the gravel toward the storage sheds. A supplier dropped off mineral supplements for livestock, and I carried half the crates myself before signing the invoice. The weight grounded me. The work reminded me that worth lives in action, not in image. The world Vivian had built began to shrink, not because people were cruel, but because people tend to step back when they discover someone is not who they said they were. A few days later, she called again. Her voice was tired in a way exhaustion alone could not explain. She said Caleb had returned her ring. He did it kindly but firmly. He told her marriage requires truth as a foundation, and he was not willing to start a life built on omissions. Vivian cried then, not loudly, just enough for her breath to shake. I listened, but I did not rescue. When she finally asked the question I knew was coming, her voice was small. Cam, do you think I ruined my life? I let the question settle before answering. No, I said. I think you ruined a story you were trying to force yourself into. But your life is still here. You just have to choose what to do with it now. She let out a slow breath like she had been holding it for years. Then she asked again softly if I could speak to the Holloways for her. And again I said no. This time she did not argue. She did not plead. She did not reach for excuses. She simply said, I understand. When the call ended, I sat back in the truck seat and looked out across the east pasture. The sun was lowering, turning the field into long strips of amber and shadow. The quiet rolled over me like a soft tide. Karma is not cruel. It does not punish with fire or fury. It does not strike like lightning or roar like thunder. Karma waits. It whispers. It reflects. It tells the truth long enough and loud enough that eventually a person must decide whether to run from it or face it. Vivian's world did not crumble because I pushed it. It crumbled because it was built on something hollow, and mine, steady and rooted, continued forward. As I headed back toward the barns to finish the day's work, I realized something else. Karma is not a hammer. It is a mirror, and Vivian was finally looking into hers. I woke the next morning with the lingering weight of Vivian's voice still in my ears. It stayed with me while I moved through the house, while I poured a cup of coffee while the kettle hissed on the stove. The air had cooled overnight, soft and crisp. The kind of morning that always made Mom open the windows when we were kids. I stepped onto the porch and breathed it in. A year had passed since the wedding that never happened. A strange marker of time, but somehow it had become the dividing line between who I had been and who I was becoming. The cooperative had survived the drought, though it left scars in the form of cautious planning and tighter margins. The fields looked healthier this season. The corn stood straighter. The soybeans carried the bright green of early promise. I had found a rhythm again, a quiet one. I still missed my parents in the moments they would have steadied me most. But grief settles into a gentler kind of companion over time. A presence that walks beside you rather than weighing down your shoulders. Around mid-afternoon, when the shadows started stretching long across the lawn, I found a white envelope tucked between the storm door and the frame. No stamps, no return address. My breath caught for a second, not from fear, but from something more like anticipation. I brought it onto the porch and sat down in the rocking chair Dad had built, the summer before he passed. The wood had been sanded smooth by years of sun and rain, and it creaked in the familiar way it always did when I settled into it. I opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. Cam, it began. I stopped letting my eyes blur for a moment. That nickname had lived in a part of me I thought I had buried. I read the rest carefully. She wrote about the months after the wedding, how the silence around her forced her to see things she had never wanted to look at, how she had spent so much time trying to become someone else that she barely remembered the girl who used to run barefoot through the rows of corn with me, how losing the Holloways had crushed the image she clung to, but not her heart. Losing me, she wrote, had crushed her heart. She wrote about sitting alone in her apartment on nights that stretched too, long remembering Mom's laugh and Dad's easy steadiness, and realizing she had abandoned the last piece of them she had left. She wrote about therapy, about volunteering at a local food pantry, about forcing herself to speak honestly when lies felt easier. She said she had not mastered anything yet, but she had begun. At the end of the letter, she wrote, "I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking for a chance to earn it slowly, respectfully, if you ever choose to let me try." I lowered the paper onto my lap and closed my eyes. The fields hummed in the distance. The porch boards warmed under my bare feet. A bird chattered from the fence line. It was all so steady, so easy to take for granted, until you realize how hard it is for some people to find ground that solid. I read the letter again, slower this time. There was no flattery, no excuses, no bending the truth into something more comfortable. Just honesty. And honesty, I had learned, is the only soil anything real can grow in. Forgiveness is never instant. It is not a door you open because someone knocks. It is a doorway you rebuild after a storm, one beam at a time. When your hands stop shaking and your breath begins to steady. Did I forgive her then? Sitting in Dad's old chair with the evening sun warming my shoulders. Not fully, but something inside me softened enough to make space. Not for who she had been, but for who she was trying to become. Later that week, I wrote her back. I kept it simple. I told her I had received her letter, that I could see the work she was trying to do, that I wished for her strength in it, that we could talk sometime carefully when we were both ready. I did not promise closeness. I did not offer a clean slate. I offered honesty, the one thing she had never asked for, and the one thing I had always needed. The next months passed in a quiet way. We exchanged messages on holidays, birthdays, little moments. Nothing was forced. Nothing was rushed. The distance remained, but it was no longer a wound, more like a scar that had finally begun to fade. Sometimes when I walked the fields at dusk, I thought about my parents. I pictured Dad leaning against the fence, arms folded, nodding once in approval. I pictured Mom smiling with that soft look she got when she believed we had learned something without her having to say a single word. Honesty, roots, dignity. They were not fancy values. They were not the kind you frame and hang on a wall, but they were the ones that kept a person from losing themselves in a world that rewards masks more than truth. Family, I had learned, is not defined by who shares your name. It is not shaped by wedding invitations or perfect photographs. It is shaped by the people who let you show up as yourself without flinching. The people who do not ask you to hide the soil under your nails or the memories stitched into your bones. The people who stand beside you when the wind changes direction and the ground shifts under your feet. That is what family is. Not an image, Not reputation, not applause, just connection, truth, the courage to be seen without shame. As the sun slid lower and painted the sky with streaks of orange and rose, I folded Vivian's letter and placed it inside the small wooden box where I kept the few belongings of my parents that still survived. Their wedding rings, Mom's pressed flower bookmark, Dad's pocket knife with the chipped handle. I set the letter beside those pieces of memory, not because it fixed everything, but because it marked a beginning. A new chapter built on honesty instead of fear. I sat back and let the rocking chair move beneath me. The breeze smelled like cut grass and coming rain. The fields rustled. Somewhere far off, a coyote called into the distance, and I felt something quiet settle into place. Not revenge, not triumph. Peace. The kind of peace that comes when you stop carrying what is not yours. The kind that grows when you finally understand your worth was never meant to be proven to someone else in the first place. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this. Silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.